Just before we start this debate, can I point out it's a 1-hour debate. I've got 4 members in, as well as the member in charge of the debate, who've already indicated that they wish to speak. We're pushing the clock a bit. Anybody who hasn't already indicated is unlikely to get called. That depends upon how long you speak for, but it's unlikely to get called. So you may wish to consider that in terms of possibly intervening rather than trying to make a speech. Sam Carling to move the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr Gale. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship today. And I'm delighted to see that many colleagues have come to this debate on furniture poverty this afternoon, a topic that often flies under the radar. Other colleagues have been campaigning on this for some time. I know my honourable friend, the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, asked a question on it recently, and I also noted written questions raising it from my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Riverside. I also know that my honourable friend, the member for Neath and Swansea East, is hosting an event here in Parliament on the subject soon, and I would encourage colleagues to attend that. Furniture poverty is the lack of essential furniture items to make a house a home, typically meaning a bed, a mattress and bedding, a table and chairs, a sofa, a wardrobe or chest of drawers, carpets or other flooring, curtains or blinds, a washing machine, fridge and freezer, and a cooker or oven. In no way is this about want, it's about need. The furniture needed to attain a socially acceptable standard of living. And without all these items, it's difficult to achieve that. Living without a proper bed, for example, leads to poor sleep and difficulty focusing for adults at work and children at school. I will give way.
I'm very, very grateful to giving way. In my constituency of Hartlepool, it's estimated that around 1,500 children don't have a bed to sleep in at night. Given the monumental impact on their education and their mental health, do you think this is a special case that needs to be addressed, particularly to support children in my constituency and others?
The honourable member makes his point well. There are lots of children affected in a number of constituencies around the country. I'll have some statistics on that later on in my speech, and I'm grateful to him for highlighting that. Living without a cooker means more ready meals and takeaway food, which is less nutritious and more expensive. No cooker means an average of £2,100 extra for a family of 4 per year on their food bill. No fridge or freezer tacks on another £1,300 to that food bill due to an inability to buy in bulk or store food safely for future use. And to avoid damp or dirty clothes without a washing machine, going to a laundrette, of which there are few around, adds just over £1,000 to the household bill. These figures are from April 2023, so increases to inflation and energy bills since then mean costs are likely higher now. It's a poverty premium. Furniture items are a huge initial expense, and many lower-income households simply don't have the money to shell out big for them. Yet their absence is far more expensive over time, and I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for securing this very important debate. But I'm sure he will agree with me that as the 6th richest economy in the world, we should not really be having this debate. But the End Furniture Poverty in Liverpool has worked with local authorities to ensure that registered social landlords have at least 10% of their properties are furnished. And I'm sure that my honourable friend would agree with me that this is not good enough, and that would he call with me on local authorities to find more resources to ensure that we don't have people living in furniture poverty.
I'm also going to mention End Furniture Poverty later in my speech. They're an excellent organisation that's doing very good work, particularly with Liverpool City Council in her constituency, in her area, and she makes her point very well. All of this has a huge impact on both physical and mental health. According to a survey of people experiencing furniture poverty by the National Centre for Social Research, 6 in 10 reported that it caused them physical pain. 9 in 10 felt stressed or anxious, living without essential items, and crucially, worried that they would not be able to replace items should they break. So the anxiety is constant. 7 in 10 felt ashamed or embarrassed by their own home, reflecting a social stigma around furniture poverty that leads those suffering to invite round family and friends less, increasing isolation. And upsettingly, 7 in 10 people surveyed who also had long-term conditions or disabilities said that living in furniture poverty made their condition worse. For those coming from homelessness, it's especially difficult. In my own region of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I know of a resident who was finally offered a flat after living in her car for months. Whilst that was a relief, not having anywhere in the unfurnished flat to sleep significantly undercut the benefits of it, as did the lack of other essential items. 9% of UK adults are missing at least one essential item, and over 1 million adults are living in deep furniture poverty, which is defined as missing 3 or more essential items. And 1.2 million children are in furniture poverty. This issue also disproportionately affects those from minority ethnic backgrounds, with 16% missing essential items compared to 7% of white British people.
Will my friend give way on that?
I will.
Thank you for giving way. Thank you for securing a debate like this. There's 2 wards in my constituency where child poverty is 63%. That cannot be allowed to continue because in the last 10 years, from 2014 to 2024, it has increased quite considerably. We need to take action and make sure that that increase is now declined, and this is once in a life opportunity for us to do that.
I do apologise. Using my reading glasses and I didn't see entirely properly. Please.
Thank my honourable friend for raising that point. I'm sure the Minister the specific statistics he raises in his own constituency, and I'm sure we'll hear more about the government's plans to address that situation in the Minister's response later on. And starkly, if you have a disability, you are 3 times more likely to be in furniture poverty than non-disabled people. The issue is at its worst in the social rented sector. Only 2% of social properties come with any furniture at all, meaning that most people move into an empty box, not a home. And that means over a quarter of social tenants are in furniture poverty. Landlords often also end up throwing away any furniture that's left when tenants move. This extends, most absurdly, to flooring. Nearly 760,000 adults in the social rented sector are living without flooring. And that means walking around on cement, wood with nails sticking out, or dirty underlay. That is often because it is ripped up by landlords when previous tenants leave, supposedly because the floor might be dirty. But in most cases, perfectly good flooring is removed just because it's the quickest and easiest thing to do. And that means tenants have to put flooring in themselves. Data from May this year shows that 83% of residents self-funded floor coverings, with only 1% receiving support from their landlord. Very few charities or local welfare schemes cover flooring, meaning that many just have to make do with nothing. Beyond being a hazard, a lack of carpet or adequate flooring makes a property far colder in winter, increasing heating costs as well. The Welsh Government has recently taken the extremely welcome step of requiring socially rented homes to provide flooring from the point of let, regardless of whether they're considered as furnished or not. And I would strongly encourage the Government to consider following the lead of our Welsh colleagues by bringing in a similar measure as we review our own decent home standard. In the private rented sector, things are better. 29% of properties are let as furnished, which provides tenants with choice. However, there's ambiguity over that figure. It could include serviced flats for those with higher incomes. There's also no legal definition of a furnished property, meaning that what counts as furnished can vary from landlord to landlord and property to property. Some properties are advertised as furnished only for tenants to arrive and find that they don't have a mattress, a cooker, a fridge, or another essential furniture item. I had personal experience of this. When I moved into a new flat myself in August, I arrived to find there was no mattress to sleep on. I had to order one myself at short notice, but I'm lucky to have been able to do that. So many people aren't able to just deal with significant expenses like that. I firmly believe that we need to formally define what furnished means to empower tenants to challenge landlords that misleadingly advertise properties as furnished. We have unfair trading regulations that should protect tenants, but when landlords are able to define furnished however they please, and with many not providing inventories of properties until a lease agreement has been signed and a tenant has been locked in, tenants cannot use those regulations effectively to challenge misleading practices. Other countries already have a legal definition, France, for example, so it would not be an unusual step, and there are ample opportunities for us to do it, either through the Decent Home Standard as we review it, or in secondary legislation arising from the Renters' Rights Bill. Other problems in the sector can exacerbate furniture poverty, with the sheer levels of rent people pay in the private sector being a major one. Private renters spend on average more than the recommended maximum of 30% of their wages on rent, which can make it difficult to buy or replace costly items. It's also possible that replacement furniture items are required more often in the private sector due to mould and damp, given that a higher proportion of homes in the private rented sector don't meet the Decent Home Standard compared to other tenures. And I welcome that the government has already taken steps to address that in the Renters' Rights Bill. I want to highlight some of the work done by charities and local authorities. End Furniture Poverty, a charity based in Liverpool, are leaders on research in this area, and I've drawn on their useful statistics throughout my speech today. They've worked with councils up and down the country, including Liverpool City Council, where more than 50% of social landlords have pledged to start a scheme to tackle furniture poverty. and also Cambridgeshire County Council. So I look forward to the presentation of End Furniture Poverty's work next week at their parliamentary event and hearing how this will affect my constituents in North West Cambridgeshire. But whilst charities do good work, they can't do it all. And they've been impacted by the difficulties in local government finances under the last government. I will give way.
I'm sure the Honourable Member will join me in celebrating Second Chance Chichester, which in my constituency is working with an organisation of crafters to restore furniture to make sure local families have access to the essential furniture that they need. But due to pressures in local government, it's becoming increasingly hard to get grants for the charitable work that they do. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that the local government settlement cannot come soon enough?
I've been a councillor myself for a number of years, and so I'm very much aware of the difficulty that local government is facing, and I agree we do need to see improvements in that. It's extremely difficult for the government, of course, given the horrendous inheritance that we've had from the previous government on this issue and just the broader economy in general. But I certainly look forward, especially to the multi-year settlements that the new government has pledged to bring forward. That would be incredibly useful for councillors. Where was I? So in February of this year, 3 in 10 charities that work with local authorities expected their funding to fall. But even charities who derive no income from local government felt that challenges in local finances would affect them. 33% felt there would be a knock-on effect for their organisation. So what can be done about furniture poverty? There's a case for some work to be done on local welfare assistance. These schemes are an ideal source of support for people who require 1 or 2 essential furniture items. They also provide vital assistance for food and fuel, and many offer a wide range of other support as well. But budgets for local welfare assistance have dwindled over the past decade after responsibility for schemes was devolved from central to local government, and as local authority budgets have been greatly reduced. That's the key point there. The devolution is not a bad thing, but devolution must come with the funding to deal with the new powers. Right now, 36 local authorities have closed their local welfare scheme, meaning it has become something of a postcode lottery whether or not people can get the support that they need. This is no huge surprise, given the perilous state of local government's finances after the last government's failures. The new government's extension to the Household Support Fund in the budget is very welcome and will be vital to so many who need it. But what will be key is effective regulation of the social and private rented sectors. The statistics from the social rented sector are stark. Social landlords need to provide more of their stock as furnished, and potential legislative routes should be considered to achieve this, I believe. In the private rented sector, the Renters' Rights Bill does so much to tackle the overriding issues that exacerbate furniture poverty for renters and shows how important regulation is. And I encourage the government to consider the small additional regulatory changes I've outlined in this speech that could make a real difference to people in furniture poverty. And I appreciate, as this is a cross-departmental issue, the Minister with us today may not be able to respond to all of those, but I would perhaps ask that she raise them with the Minister relevant for those, and perhaps ask that Minister to either write to me or meet with me to discuss them. That would be very helpful. Mr Gale, I will end speaking at this point and defer to my colleagues who I know will have lots of valuable contributions to make. Thank you.
Considered furniture poverty. We can keep contributions to just over around 5 minutes. We might be able to get everybody in. Jim Shan.
Roger, again, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I first of all congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire for leading the debate. I'll give a Northern Ireland perspective, as I often do on these things, and what we're doing back in our constituency. So, Roger, end furniture poverty is stated that 9% of all UK adults of 18 years of age and over are missing at least one form of essential furniture items. Furthermore, 1 million adults are in deep furniture poverty, meaning they're missing more than 3 items. And these items can be included a bed, a wardrobe, a cooker, blinds or curtains, or indeed a fridge freezer. Absolute necessities for all homes. End furniture poverty estimated in total there are some at least 6 million people in the UK experiencing some sort of furniture poverty. In addition to this, the absolute low income increased by 500,000 people before housing costs, and some 600,000 people after housing costs in the year of 2022-2023. Further analysis, Sir Roger, have revealed that at least 9% of children, or 1.2 million children, are experiencing furniture poverty within these households. And average cost of an item is some £250. This means it would cost approximately £2.25 million to end furniture poverty. It's quite a challenge. We often forget about what different types of poverty and how it can affect families across the UK. So the debate today on furniture policy is so apt and so important for his constituents, for my constituents, as I will illustrate. I am very fortunate, Sir Roger, to have a number of churches who help with furniture poverty. And in particular, I'd like to mention one in particular because I deal with them regularly, simply because they're available and they're very, very attentive to any requests that we put forward. My office has a great relationship with the St Vincent de Paul organisation, a UK charity that supports those who are on the breadline and at risk of being plunged into absolute poverty. They estimated approximately, and it's a massive figure, 900, almost 1 million people were experiencing enforced deprivation. St Vincent de Paul have been fantastic with my office in providing support directly for household goods, and they do that regularly without any questions whatsoever, because the people that we deal with each week in the office are those who need this desperately. So it's also great to hear that other organisations in Northern Ireland are doing some schemes to support people with household goods this winter as well. We are at that time of the year again, Sir Roger. Christmas time, I think, brings it home very, very clearly. I think the request for the debate today, it comes at a time when many of us are focused upon that very issue, where so many people are struggling with the rise in energy bills, cost of living, cold weather on the horizon. We're often reminded that individuals and families out there are really struggling, and it's important that there is support out there for them. I conclude with this, Sir Roger, and hopefully I'll give a few minutes for some others to participate as well. It is so critical that provision is made to ensure that families have the best support. This debate gives that opportunity. We look forward to the Minister's contribution and the Assistant, or the Shadow Minister as well. Furniture poverty has proven to be a real issue, which so many people are experiencing, given the statistics, the dire statistics that we've just mentioned. We must do more to support these charities. I think it's an opportunity, Minister, if you don't mind me saying, to work hand in hand with charities. I think it's something that it should be done as a matter of course, but perhaps when you're coming back with it, so when the Minister's coming back with our comments, she might be able to illustrate just what that is, so we can then together provide the support for those people in need. Thank you so much.
Very much. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I'd also like to thank my honourable friend for North West Cambridgeshire for bringing this important debate today, and I think we can see by the interest in members the importance of the subject to colleagues. This topic is one that's also quite dear to my own heart, and I think we've discussed already. Growing up, my mum and I were homeless twice, unfortunately. After moving to hostels and B&Bs and temporary accommodation, we were finally given the keys to a new council house, but with no curtains to keep out the daylight and give us privacy, with no mattress, no bed, only a duvet, and then eventually a mattress on the floor to share, to sleep on. Whilst we had a roof over our head, we certainly didn't have a comfortable and warm home. And unfortunately, that's an all too common experience for people in 2024. For families like mine growing up, who've been made homeless or who've been squeezed out by the precarious private rented sector, the likelihood of being able to afford furnishing a property is rare. I think members and colleagues here will have often seen properties in their constituency with furniture dumped outside as people have to quickly leave their private rented sector property with nowhere to go. And all of this challenge has been compounded by the cost of living crisis. We've seen a 31% increase in the cost of furniture in the period between 2020 and 2023. And when my constituents in Uxbridge and South Ruislip are evicted from their homes, which, as my inbox is testament, is an all too common occurrence, they have no idea where they're going to sleep that night. They're told by the council now to fit all of their belongings into one black bin bag and to turn up at the Civic Centre. And quite clearly, one bag of belongings is not going to contain a bed frame for their children to sleep on, an oven to cook their meals, or a fridge to store their medication. These families are also clearly unable to afford storage, which is very expensive, or transport to change and move their belongings to whatever temporary accommodation they are eventually given. They have to throw away vital belongings or leave them behind, leading to further distressing and life-changing impacts on top of their homelessness. Should they eventually be fortunate enough to get a permanent house, as we've heard today from the excellent work of charities, only 2% of social housing is furnished, significantly less than the private rented sector. Many are then left without absolutely essential items. that we all need for a constructive and a healthy life. And we've heard from the testimony already that 26% of people in social housing are affected, and a significant group in deep furniture poverty, which is lacking 3 essential items or more. And that particularly affects the most disadvantaged, the disabled, people from ethnic minority communities, or even a higher rate of furniture poverty. And we know that these impacts are scarring. They can often be lifelong and life-changing. The health impacts of not being able to get the nutrients that a young family might need from a balanced diet because they can't afford an oven or perhaps even a microwave to even heat up a ready meal. They have lasting impacts on children and their development, unable to get a good night's sleep because they don't have a bed or a desk to do any homework like their peers. And the impacts are also financial. I think great research from the End Furniture Poverty campaign, which we've heard really fantastic things about, and rightly so, in the debate today, has shown, as has been said, significant extra financial impacts on families, on their food bill, on their heating bill, due to being unable to afford those basics. And lacking those necessary furniture items becomes a trap. It forces families already facing financial hardship, already facing homelessness, to often go towards unscrupulous loan sharks, take out further debt, borrow money from friends or family if they can, and that leads to a cycle of poverty and destitution. It leads to rent arrears and it leads to higher eviction, and the cycle begins yet again. The good news, despite that, is that we can end furniture poverty. Since taking power, this government has shown it understands the importance of working with local government, where many of the solutions for this lie, and we need to empower local authorities and support them to tackle this issue. There's many good local initiatives, we've heard about some already from Liverpool, and more of that needs to happen. We need to work with local and regional government on regional reuse hubs, where furniture and appliances left behind in properties can be reallocated to the families most in need. Many local recycling centres often have furniture that people don't want to see go to waste left in them. And why can't we reuse this furniture for those in housing and furniture poverty? I do think we need to look at the Household Support Fund. This government's made a big, strong commitment, I think £1 billion in the budget to this going forward. Unfortunately, a lot of this funding is no longer used for household items, but for other much-needed issues. But can the guidance for this fund be stronger about the importance of tackling furniture poverty? And as has been said, we need to work with housing providers, with registered social landlords, to support them all to move to that key 10% goal of social housing stock that is furnished. And we're rightly updating the Decent Home Standard, but surely this must include both the inside and outside of a home, and furnishings are part of decent housing. And I welcome the government's commitment to the homelessness strategy and the child poverty task force. Again, perhaps these welcome and much needed pieces of work could be convening roles to tackle this issue. And tackling furniture poverty will also address the strain on the public purse. We know, as has been said, the impacts on poverty, on health, on educational impacts. Tackling this issue not only is a cost, but ultimately will also lead to savings to health, to education, to special educational needs bills and the welfare state. To sum up, I really want to thank the charities for their fantastic work in this space, both in providing the much needed support that is there to families in our communities. Trinity Homelessness Project in my own constituency, for example, do fantastic work, but also for their advocacy for much needed action in this space. I thank members today for their contributions, and I look forward to hearing from the front bench team later today and to working with them to tackle this issue and to deliver the change that people in this country not only want but also desperately need, so we can end furniture poverty for good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Under your chairmanship, my first ever Westminster debate as well, so I'm very grateful to be here. And an honour to follow some fantastic contributions, and thank you to my honourable friend from North West Cambridgeshire for raising this issue. People have already said 6 million people in the UK living in furniture poverty. That's nearly 10% of the UK population who don't have access to at least one essential item of furniture. But as my honourable friend says, that definition is not clear. And when I speak to my friends about furniture poverty, it's an issue that I've become quite interested in since joining the House and the advocacy of some great organisations. They think it's about cookers and fridges, but actually a big part of this, and the bit that I'm particularly interested in and want to focus on today, is on fabric, so on carpets, floor finishes and windows. More generally though, just to pick up on some of the points being already made, furniture poverty actually has a much bigger societal impact than just that direct impact on families. There is a link between families in insecure homes, between their healthcare outcomes, the pressure on local authorities and care organisations for those families. But actually personally for the families where they don't have good fabric in their homes, so carpets, window coverings, seeing higher energy bills is typical for families living in furniture poverty, and also a rise in social issues and other issues caused by the insecurity it creates. I think my honourable friend mentioned 70% of people feeling socially isolated on the counts of their impact of furniture poverty, which leads to shame, which leads to not having their friends around or their kids' friends around when they want to, and actually leads to families being really isolated, and older people as well, as they struggle with the stress and anxiety. And as was mentioned as well, 60% of people in furniture poverty struggling to maintain healthy eating habits, which has a knock-on impact only on individual, but also on our health system and the health of our nation. But I wanted to talk a bit more about carpets and window coverings, and as someone who joins the House for the construction industry and someone who's found a big focus on housing in this government, fantastic to see it, one of our 5 missions. There are 1.2 million people living without suitable floor coverings in their homes, and as was mentioned, about 3/4 of those are in social housing, and about 870,000 people without appropriate window coverings, and about half of those again in social housing. So whilst this is a big issue for the social housing sector, it's not purely an issue that impacts just those in social housing, and it's an impact that has everyone. And having had representations from Northern Ireland, the north of England, even down to London, it's clearly an issue that is impacting on the whole of the UK. And, you know, from an environmental perspective, the lack of suitable floor coverings and window coverings means that we see significant heat loss from properties, which ultimately raises people's energy bills, and that particularly can compound the impacts of cold winters on elderly people, and also on families now with rising temperatures in the summer, particularly on the result of climate change, on the ability of families to and older people to keep cool in the heat of summer. But actually also End Furniture Poverty recognises and have played back to me that actually creates hazard for those who have mobility challenges, particularly where floors aren't suitable for the use of mobility equipment or other things. So I welcome, though, that the government has extended the Household Support Fund. That's one of the big things we can do, is make sure there is funding available for people particularly where a local welfare scheme isn't in place. And in my constituency, Northampton South, we're part of the West Northamptonshire Council Unitary Authority area. There isn't a local welfare scheme, so people will rely on that Household Support Fund for support. But frustratingly, despite the fact that my council has a cross-party anti-poverty task force, I haven't yet seen a focus on furniture poverty, and when I meet the council leader in a few weeks' time, it's on our agenda to discuss. Of the £5.2 million of Household Support Fund given out by West Northampton Council, only 168k of that went towards furniture poverty, despite there being massive levels of it in my constituency, as we've heard, and I'm sure we'll hear from others as well in the room. I just wanted to end, though, on actually what could these solutions be, and hopefully help the Minister in addressing what is a particularly challenging solution. My honourable friend from Uxbridge rightly talks about furniture reuse, and whilst that is a solution, it's becoming increasingly more difficult. Fire retardants used in older furniture are now proved to be hazardous, and actually there's research by the Furniture Industry Research Association. They tested furniture that potentially could be reused in social housing, and only 1 in 6 passed modern standards. So particularly, we can see with the reuse of furniture, but we are actually passing on the problem, and ultimately, for social landlords and others, that exacerbates the problem of their liabilities. And if they're encouraging the reuse of furniture but can't prove that that's going to be safe for families, for children, for older people, when that comes through. But actually also design for reuse is really important. We're seeing an economy and a society where we see more disposable furniture, things that were only used once, used for a few years, bought on the cheap and then chucked away. And if we're going to drive up the use of reuse of furniture particularly, I think we have to do more to encourage industry to address that challenge in the way they design furniture and design for reuse. It was also mentioned by the intervention by my honourable friend about furnished tenancies, and particularly we see large amount of furnished tenancies in some areas like London and less so in constituencies like Northampton South. And End Furnished Poverty have advocated for a 10% target for social landlords. I agree in principle, that's a good idea, but I think without the funding and support for social housing, and particularly for, in my constituency, Northampton Partnership Homes, that would put real pressure on services and actually isn't a viable solution until we get funding right for our social housing, which I know this government is working hard on. Another thing we can do, of course, is design out the need for reuse. So in the way we design our buildings, and particularly the government committed to a council house building revolution, the way we design out the need for temporary floor coverings particularly, and also we design windows, fixtures, fittings to allow for easy replacement of carpets, for curtains, blinds, etc. Actually, the way we design our buildings in the first place can actually make it a lot easier to make sure that it's cheap and efficient, particularly for social landlords, to replace things when they run out. But finally, one thing that's kind of piqued my interest is the corporate social responsibility of carpet manufacturers. And it's a very niche issue, but Northampton South is the home of the UK's only carpet recycling centre for non-wall-based carpet. And we can take carpet, break it down through electrolysis, and it goes into pellets that then go to make car bumpers. So the old carpet cut-offs from carpet manufacturers actually go off to make car bumpers. And that's in a small, innovative business in Dustin, in my constituency. But there's an interesting thing that I'm going to be checking on this is for those for wall-based carpets, which can't be recycled through that process, for tappy carpets and those other big manufacturers, where does that carpet go? If they get to an end of a line and they can't sell it, where does that go? And how can we get that back into the system, potentially through social enterprises or other? There's a really interesting social enterprise in my constituency, Goodwill Solutions, who would potentially have a solution to how we could reuse that and get that into homes that desperately need floor coverings. So I'd end just finally in saying I recognise, as my honourable friend said, we have to end furniture poverty, and I am confident that actually this government sees this issue, and in our drive for improving housing standards and hopefully through the Decent Home Standard and the Quality Home Standard in Wales, we're going to see a real drive to address this, and thank you for giving me the time to contribute today.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship and contribute to the debate today. First, may I congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire for securing this debate today. I wanted to share my experience, but also just want to reaffirm my admiration for the member for Uxbridge and South Russell. Every time he tells the story of his upbringing and the challenges faced, I'm very grateful to consider him a colleague in this House and for sharing his message with the Chamber and the Westminster Hall today. I must admit, Mr. Chairman, that I had a very fortunate and comfortable childhood. I had a stable home with everything I could ever need to do my homework, organise my things and get a good sleep. Things that I shamelessly took for granted. It wasn't until I left primary school that I realised that many of my friends faced very different challenges and experiences at home, experiences that I couldn't even have imagined at such a young age. It was then I first understood and realised the detrimental impact that furniture insecurity had on the lives of many of my friends. I remember visiting one of my closest friends' houses for months with the washing machine broken and my friend's parents frantically hand washing every evening while we played video games and ate pizza. Sorry, you wanted to go into it.
On the point of... thank you very much, Sir Roger. On the point of hand washing, the point that I really wanted to raise in this debate was about washer-dryers as opposed to just washing machines. So as a mother of three, I spend a lot of time doing the washing, and it sounds like a really trivial point, but actually in the northwest of England it is incredibly difficult to get washing to dry. It starts raining in October and it just keeps doing it all year. And so, you know, it's all well and good if household support funds will provide washing machines, and they are great, and that is a good start. But it is not the whole of the problem. So I would like to take the opportunity to implore the Minister to raise the point about dryers. There are, of course, other problems with affording the electricity to run them, but you create damp in homes if you don't have the ability to dry clothing within them. Thank you.
Thank you. My honourable friend for Congleton makes a very valid point. But at the time, I didn't know that both of the parents of my best friend had lost their jobs and had gone months without work. And that meant that those important savings that they had were going to keep the roof above their head, then it couldn't go on getting a new washing machine. I remember suddenly not being able to visit my friend or stay over I learnt later that this was because his bed was broken and he was too afraid to let me sleep over because I would see him sleeping in a sleeping bag on the floor. It was only thanks to donations from family friends that these issues were resolved. Mr. Chairman, those years were when the economy were in a relatively good position. Now, in my constituency, almost 1,000 children will go to bed tonight in Redditch without a bed. Or sleep without a bed, I apologise. It was only that... I'm trying to be quick, but at this point, I want to mention Youth Starts, a community youth social enterprise that was based in my county council division in Bromsgrove at this time and has now opened a second branch with partners in my constituency in Redditch. For over a decade, Chief Executive Marion Kenyon, her staff and her team of volunteers have provided free furniture, emergency food and household supplies to families and individuals in greatest need, either on low incomes or in financial crisis. Their dedication and compassion are unmatched, and I look forward to visiting their branch next week. However, their work shows that furniture poverty is not an acute but a chronic problem, often the canary in the coal mine that alerts us to many of the problems facing their household. Furniture poverty is absolute, and it's a heartbreaking indictment on how all of us in politics must do more to support those who need support the most. There are ways in which we can support these people, many of them listed by the member for North West Cambridgeshire, the member for Liverpool Riverside and the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. I'm happy to be a signpost. My excellent office team of Teresa Deacon and Monica Stringfellow are doing great work in linking those who need support with existing organisations and funds like the Household Support Fund. But that's not enough. I welcome the contents of the Renters' Rights Bill, but it's time for a radical look at our welfare system, at how we reward work and recognise when the system isn't working. I'm pleased that the Minister's here and the promise that she's made about reforming our welfare system, but right now 10% of all adults live in furniture poverty. When I walk around my constituency and when I visit my schools and I talk to careers advisors and when I talk to teachers, we're talking about the same children who are deeply affected by this issue. And it's their life chances, it's their dreams that are being broken by the fact that we haven't come to grips with this problem as a country. And so I implore the Minister, she's been a hero of mine for many years outside of this chamber. I implore her that the children that are going to staff our NHS, that are going to be the next generation of teachers, that are going to rebuild this country and fix our foundations, are the children that need their support now. And thank you for the opportunity to speak here.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Roger, and I thank the member for West Cambridge for securing this important debate. No one should fear their future, struggle to put food on the table or worry about heating their homes. The cost of living crisis has been a huge financial hardship across the country and restricted the lives and chances of millions. And furniture poverty is particularly in social housing. And it's a scandal that only 2% of social housing is fully furnished. And as a new MP, like the member for North West Cambridgeshire, I have already experienced 2 examples where I've helped constituents of mine out of homelessness and into social housing, but only to find that they move into these homes that were not furnished, and that, well, unfortunately, this is all too commonplace. And I'm very grateful to the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip for sharing his own personal experience of homelessness, and indeed of furniture poverty. Unfortunately, I must agree with him, this experience is sadly commonplace, and in my constituency, we are seeing it regularly. The end of furniture poverty groups are considering flooring as an essential item, and with good reason. Without flooring, as we've heard, it is hard to keep a property clean, and if the property is old, particularly built before the 1980s, then not having flooring will make rooms difficult to heat. And as the member for North Cambridgeshire mentioned, that flooring is often thrown out, which makes it even more ridiculous. Vulnerable members of our community, when they move into a home, that should be a new start. It shouldn't feel as if it's still under construction, which is quite the reason that we feel. And like the member for Northampton South, I also have a background in construction, and I was grateful to him for sharing his insights on the fabrics, and particularly his point that about a lack of flooring is also an issue for various members of the environment. And we shouldn't feel as if this is happening. One point I would make, the wool carpets can be composted. And yet, we still have 1.2 million people in the UK whose lives and homes are without flooring. And in my constituency, where over 44,000 people are struggling with fuel poverty, and where 17,000 pensioners are due to lose their winter fuel allowance, many people are forced between choosing this problem between heating their homes or visiting and having friends. And I take the point very clearly that people suffer from social isolation due to lots of these issues where they don't dare let people into their homes. And I'm sure we've all seen that canvassing where people hardly open the door because they're scared to let you see what is behind it. And that is bound to cause all sorts of quite serious issues. For the record, I want to note that Wiltshire Money in my constituency have held focus forums on the subject of furniture poverty, and I applaud the charities working across Wiltshire who've worked so hard to find ways of alleviating poverty in all forms. And as mentioned by the Honourable Member for Strangford, the churches and the charities are working hard, but this burden should not fall on them alone. And we are not doing enough. And I really congratulate the member for North West Cambridgeshire for securing this debate and for raising this important issue. The Liberal Democrats are happy to support colleagues across the House in any efforts to end the cost of living crisis and address furniture poverty as part of that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I thank the Honourable Member for North West Cambridge for securing this debate and opening with a very thoughtful speech where I certainly learnt many things, and the interventions and speeches today, as ever, the Honourable Member for Strangford, interventions from gentlemen from Hartlepool and Northampton South, the new member there. I've found a really interesting point around the home design, as did the front bench lady from the Lib Dems. And I agree about the point about charity. The challenge is, hello, I'm here from the government to help you, sometimes isn't always the right approach equally. But I think there's certainly much in this flooring debate. And I too thank the new member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip for sharing his impact. I lost my home when my dad was made disabled. I certainly didn't have people round due to disability. So we may approach things differently in this House about how we fix things, but actually many of our experiences are often very similar. So I thank him for sharing that, because these things are never easy to do. The outgoing Conservative government certainly found this as a hidden issue, and I did when I had my time in the Department of Work and Pensions. I welcome hearing from the Honourable Lady opposite, because we have debated together often, and it's a pleasure to be in the chamber with her this afternoon. I do believe, though, in this area we had a strong record of understanding in the DWP, and I recognise some of the officials in the chamber this afternoon. But the challenge always is how to approach these matters, and of course despite delivering the fastest growing economy in the G7 and the economy mentioned today, the challenges around the pandemic, around the war in Ukraine, meant that very often supporting the most vulnerable was absolutely crucial and very much a challenge over the last few years. But the benefits rightly were uprated with inflation, the state pension by 10.1% in 2023 and again 8.5% this year. And I was very proud to work on the cost of living support, which I'm sure the Minister may come on to mention, the £94 billion of cost of living support, and I was the Minister that delivered the key cost of living payments to 8.3 million people in 2023, and that is no mean feat for the Department of Work and Pensions. And I also signed into law the regulations to bring 6 million extra extra cost disability benefits, £150 additionally for disabled people. The End Furniture Poverty Now report is stark, with 55% reporting that those of them with a disability need those extra payments. And in fact, I visited furniture poverty support that we gave as the government, particularly in Wolverhampton, and it was very clear it was about materials and fabrics as much as beds. So I thank them for their report, and I appreciate that this is something the department is very much seeking to understand. And I appreciate too the Honourable Lady and the Labour Party have a somewhat complicated relationship with universal credit, but we do know it works in terms of getting support to those people that need it, particularly during the pandemic. The move from a paper-based process has been absolutely a change that we certainly lent on during the pandemic. And when I was the Minister, we were able to allocate 900 million of the dormant assets scheme to projects across the UK to alleviate wider poverty and again to support the charity sector. I know many local authorities understand the challenges and needs from their communities best, and that's why I absolutely support the extension of the household support scheme. Of course, that was something when I was the Minister that we really worked on flexibility and guidance for local councils, whether it was buying an air fryer or supporting with an energy bill or indeed a washer and a dryer. That was absolutely possible. And in the very first tranche, £3.8 million and £4.8 million awarded to my own local authorities in East and West Sussex, respectively. And I've seen this, as I say, in action in Wolverhampton. I've seen, though, the support that's needed to be given in libraries through support through the Citizens Advice Services, both in East Grinstead and Uckfield in my own constituency. And I'm glad that we're close to this need on the ground. And I do applaud the government for supporting this. And I do hope that alongside the uplift to the LHA that we and I were able to deliver on, that she can too persuade the Treasury that this is important to continue with. Now, of course, we know that the government's decisions in the budget will certainly add to some challenges. It is frankly shocking, and I think the Minister would agree with me, that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation concluding the average family is going to be £770 worse off in real terms by October 2029 compared to today due to the budget. So it's a clear sign that our constituents need to know where those £300 of energy savings will materialise from. And of course, shamefully, the changes to the 10 million pensioner payments. We know, of course, that it's really important that the government responds to the Social Security Advisory Committee about the potential poverty impact. And I do ask the Minister, if perhaps in responding, whether she can explain to me how she feels this will work in terms of furniture poverty. We heard about the choices between heating and eating, and that's certainly something I worked to alleviate. And also, I'd love to hear from the Minister, particularly around the disabled people point, about the future of the cross-government work of the disability champions, which I understand somewhat has been sidelined, which meant that each department took a focus when it came to disability and poverty in terms of our disabled people. So to wrap up, Mr Chairman, taken together with the impact of the budget of broken promises and looking to the future, I hope that the government can be sure that people can keep warm this weekend as pensioners, that they will continue to work with local authorities and the Treasury to help those people finding themselves affected by furniture poverty and work to alleviate that. I think there's some very practical ways mentioned today, and as the opposition we will work with the government, we will work with members to make sure that we support any changes that are possible. But I do say to government members, when they troop through the lobby voting this evening on the budget today, that they'll remember this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Roger. As ever, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I would like to thank the Honourable Member for North West Cambridgeshire for having this debate, and also for the very important work that he has done to support the Renters' Rights Bill, which will make a big difference to the experience of people living in privately rented homes. And I'd also, at this point, if I may, Sir Roger, on behalf of us all, congratulate the member for East Grinstead and Uckfield in her new appointment. She is right to say that she and I have debated these issues many times, and I will miss doing so, as I know that many of my colleagues in the DWP miss her. So we wish her all the very best in her new role. Now, the level of poverty is currently unacceptable, with 1.3 million more people in poverty compared to 2010. Poverty damages lives in so many ways, and we've heard all about that this afternoon. People simply cannot fulfil their potential when struggling to pay for, or in many cases, just going without basic essentials. And I am determined that we take steps to put that right. Of course, good work will always be the foundation of the approach in tackling poverty, and members will know that we had a manifesto commitment to bring forward changes in this area, and we'll shortly publish the Get Britain Working White Paper that will announce our reforms in this area. We'll have a new service to support more people to enter and remain in work and to do better in work, and also a youth guarantee with increased join-up of employment and health, which is causing so many challenges in this area. Through our plan to make work pay, we'll make sure that we create opportunities for all by tackling low pay, poor working conditions and job security. This is a truly ambitious agenda to empower working people and grow our economy. We want to protect living standards, and wages are very important in doing that. And the new Labour government introduced the national minimum wage back in 1999. That has had the transformative effect on the fortunes of working people. And in last week's budget, we saw the national living wage. It announced that it will rise to £12.21 an hour from next April, boosting the pay of 3 million workers, an increase of 6.7%, worth £1,400 a year for a full-time worker, helping us to make progress towards a genuinely living wage. And a couple of members have mentioned the Child Poverty Task Force, and I would just say that I would take this session in today as a submission through the Child Poverty Task Force process, because I think we've shown how interconnected many of these issues are. It is shameful that in a rich country like the UK, 4 million children were living in relative poverty last year, and that 800,000 children have used a food bank in the last 12 months. And as has been said, the End Child Poverty campaign has suggested that 1.2 million children were in furniture poverty in 2022. This is just unacceptable. It scars children's lives now and can also damage their long-term health, educational and employment outcomes, and it holds our country back. So as I've said, we're determined to see change. So I hope it's helpful to members that I give a brief update on the Child Poverty Task Force, which is working to publish a comprehensive and ambitious child poverty strategy in the spring. And last month we published a framework to set out how we'll develop the strategy, harnessing all available levers, because as so many members have said, policy in one area affects another. So we want to develop the strategy exactly with that in mind. We've got 4 key themes: incomes, costs, increasing financial resilience, and getting better local support. And on that note, I recently visited Glasgow, where the City Council there are doing excellent work to join up locally, as members have suggested. Later this month, the task force will meet employers, trade unions and think tanks to discuss options to increase incomes and financial resilience in low-income households. We want to make sure that the strategy will address poverty in every corner of the land, and that we hear and learn from families in poverty as we shape it. We're going to hold engagement events across the UK. I've already visited various constituencies myself, bringing together a diverse range of voices and setting up a new forum of parents and carers to ensure the experiences of our kids are included at the heart of the strategy.
As a government, we believe that a wealthy country like the United Kingdom should have a social security system that meets the needs of people who are unable to fully support themselves through work. And we know that for many, the system we inherited is not currently achieving this. We're determined to fix the fundamentals so that low-income families can afford the basics. We've inherited a number of policies and a challenging fiscal climate that have left us with difficult choices. And I would just respond to the point that the member for East Grinstead and Uckfield, I got that right? Yeah. made about universal credit. I think it's fair to say that that policy has been on a long journey, and some of the points that she made about the responsiveness of social security during the pandemic are important. We have to learn from that and try to address the challenges that we are in now, which is why we have committed to reviewing universal credit, and we'll listen to a full range of views on potential changes to make sure it's doing its job now. As a first step, the Chancellor announced in last week's budget that we'll introduce a fair repayment rate that will help households on universal credit who are having deductions made from their benefit, perhaps because they had a loan of some kind, perhaps even because they moved into a new home and they needed to buy furniture or other items. We'll make sure that the deductions from their benefit, that they can retain more of the money to help them budget for essentials like this. Over 1.2 million households on universal credit will benefit by changing that deduction cap from 25% to 15%, which means an average of £420 a year, which is a good down payment on a future plan. Turning now to the specific issue of furniture affordability, most of us, of course, will experience large one-off costs or unexpected expenditure at some point. But as members have explained very fully, these costs can be very difficult to budget for, and we do not want to drive people into debt. I'll take a very brief intervention from the member for Strangford.
I mentioned about the significant portion that charities do, churches in particular. St Vincent de Paul, just your thoughts.
Sir Roger, the honourable gentleman for Strangford makes his point very well. And in fact, let me respond to a number of questions that ministers raised very briefly. I would say to the member for North West Cambridgeshire on his point, I will ask the relevant minister to write to him on regulatory changes arising from the bill that he served so ably on. But I just want to assure him that in DWP we will work across government departments, because these areas do cover different departmental responsibilities, and as I said, we'll include all of the points in the Child Poverty Task Force. And of course, the member for Strangford's right. We're a repair cafe in my own constituency, does a fantastic job. With regards to the member for Uxbridge comments, who made a very excellent speech on HSF guidance, if I could encourage him to be part of the conversation on this, I'll take away what he's said, but he might also want to write to me with more details. And for other members too, you know, we're looking at all of the ways in which poverty is now affecting people, given spikes in energy prices and other things, and the comments that were made about the construction of homes and how we can limit the costs of energy are very important. And I would say to members to bring those points forward and to keep doing so, because now is the time to address them. Members will know that the social security system has always made provision to help people on low incomes without adequate savings, and there are budgeting loans and advances and other things that we consider the impact of, and I mentioned the change in deductions to address that point, because we know that whilst there will always be people who struggle to meet unexpected costs, no one wants to have a system where large numbers of people are relying on crisis support to help them feed their families or to pay for heating or other day-to-day essentials. We want it to be the system to be genuinely responding to a crisis, not a chronic problem. But to support the upcoming child poverty strategy and to address the demand we currently face, as the member for East Grinstead and Uckfield mentioned, we're continuing to provide substantial funding for crisis support through the Household Support Fund and discretionary housing payments. We'll be investing £1 billion, including the Barnet impact, to extend the Household Support Fund in England for an additional year until the 31st of March 2026, and to maintain discretionary housing payments fund for a further year, ensuring that the current targeted support is available for the most vulnerable. However, in the end, we know that there is no quick fix. The issues we have in this country are deep-rooted and complicated, but that can never be an excuse for not trying to tackle them. We've taken the first steps. We've got more to come in the Child Poverty Strategy and the Get Britain Working White Paper, and I look forward to working with all members here to get this right.
The question is, this House has considered furniture poverty. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary no. Ayes have it. Order, order. Sitting stands adjourned.